Good evening. I know you're going to be surprised, but I'm going to do a concert tonight no, I'm just kidding. Pastor Josh is working with the youth tonight. This is Haley's first Wednesday, so he feels like he needs to be in there, which I think is a good thing that he do that and kind of help get things kick-started. And I'm going to do something different tonight. I hope that you will enjoy it. And let me back up by saying, when I first started studying the Bible, I don't know about you, when I would go to the Old Testament, I would just go, really? I mean, I didn't understand. Didn't understand what fit where, who did what, and why. And after a while, as I kept studying, I realized, really, the Old Testament is a story. It is a story of the beginning, how we got here, and then, of course, you know, the fall and all of that. But then the creation of the country of Israel and the people of Israel, and why and what that means. But I'm saying all that to say that whenever I was able to condense the Bible, and I began to understand, oh, Jeremiah was this guy who spoke to these people for this reason. I didn't have to know everything about Jeremiah, but I could understand like the overview of why him, or Ezekiel. Where does Ezekiel fit? Well, you know, Ezekiel is in basically Babylon when they go into captivity, and he's a prophet to them there. But anyway, what I want to do tonight, I have a little 35-minute video that I want to show, and it basically is what I just described. It is a condensed overview, summary of the entire Old Testament. And I would encourage you, if you would like to take notes and ask questions, because we'll have time at the end. It's only 35 minutes, and you can ask questions, and we can discuss it. But I'm hoping that what I can do is shrink the Old Testament for you so that it's not so voluminous that you're trying to figure out, what is this about? It's kind of like, I'm not a puzzle guy. I don't have patience for that. But April, you know, would do puzzles, and Bailey loves to do puzzles, and they would get the edges done first. And once you do the edges, then you start. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? You do puzzles. You always do the edges first, and then you do the insides. And so, what I think this will do for you tonight is this will be the edges for you, that you go, oh, okay, now I can start fitting things inside. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and start the video. Maybe we could take the lights out, I guess. And if you want to take notes, I would encourage that. Just write down something that you're thinking about. And so, and let me preface this by saying also, this is obviously not DI, what am I trying? AI generated, and you're going to look at this and go, their words don't even match their mouth, or it'll be a picture of someone. You may have Noah, and then they'll do it the next guy, and it's not the same Noah. So just bear with us, and it's going to be okay. The main thing I want you to get is the information about what they're talking about, and so I think that's probably all I need to say. So let's just, then there will also be advertisements. And it's just up to Shannon to do the skipping on the advertisements. And I have no control over what they may be advertising, okay? So anyway, with no further, let's pray and ask God to give us revelation tonight. Lord, let this be a time of just learning, that we learn something that we didn't know before, and let it be a springboard, hopefully, to understanding better what we have in our hands with the Old Testament. So in Jesus' name, with no further ado, amen. God bless you. Let's do it.
Testament, 39 books, 4,000 years.
Turn it up.
Most people read it as a collection of separate stories. Abraham over here, Moses over there, David somewhere in the middle, the prophets scattered at the end. But it is not a collection.
Is the sound okay?
One story,
you need more?
one promise,
Maybe just take
One
it up a
thread
little
that
bit more if
begins
you
on the
can.
first page of Genesis
There you go.
and does
Good.
not stop until the last verse of Malachi. And once you see that thread, you will finally have a full understanding of the entire Old Testament. Every story you thought you knew changes. Today, we are going to walk through the entire Old Testament in 35 minutes, not as a timeline, not as a list, but as one continuous story. If you are new, please subscribe and like this video. Let us begin. In the beginning, God created everything, the heavens and the earth, light and darkness, sea and sky, every living thing. And at the center of it all, He placed two people in a garden with a single rule: do not eat from that tree. They ate, sin entered the world, death followed. The perfect creation fractured. The ground was cursed. Pain entered childbirth. Work became toil. And for the first time in the biblical narrative, human beings hid from the God who made them. The intimacy between Creator and creation was shattered in a single act of disobedience. This is not merely a story about fruit. This is the moment the entire trajectory of human history pivoted. Everything that follows in the Old Testament, every war, every exile, every sacrifice, every prophet crying in the wilderness, is a consequence of this moment. And in the wreckage, God spoke. Not to Adam, not to Eve, to the serpent. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is the first promise in the Bible. Theologians call it the proto-evangelium, the first gospel. The word he is singular, not humanity in general. One specific descendant of the woman will crush evil. This is the seed. And the entire Old Testament, every war, every king, every exile, every prophet, is the story of tracking this seed through 4,000 years of chaos. Every page you turn is asking the same question: is the seed still alive? Within 10 generations, the chaos was total. Genesis chapter 6 records that every thought of the human heart was only evil continually. The bloodline from which the promised descendant would come was drowning in corruption. God reduced the entire human race to a single family, Noah and his 8, and reset the world with a flood. After the waters receded, God made a covenant with Noah. He set a rainbow in the sky, and here is a detail most people have never considered. The Hebrew word for rainbow, keshet, literally means a war bow, a weapon. The imagery is not decorative, it is military. God is hanging up his weapon, aimed away from earth, toward the heavens. He is symbolically disarming himself toward humanity. He will not reset again. Whatever it takes to keep the promise alive, it will not be destruction. It will be something else entirely. But humanity was not finished rebelling. At Babel, they built a tower to make a name for themselves, to concentrate their power and defy God's command to fill the earth. God scattered the nations. And here, God made a strategic pivot that would define the rest of the Bible. Babel proved that dealing with humanity on a global scale was not working. Floods did not fix them. Scattering did not humble them. So God abandoned the macro and chose the micro. He would save the world, but he would do it through a single family, a single bloodline, a single zip code. Out of this fragmented, scattered world, God called one man, Abraham, from the line of Shem. One family, one covenant, one thread. God called Abraham out of Ur, a pagan city in Mesopotamia, and made a promise so audacious it bordered on absurd. Genesis chapter 12. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Abraham was 75 years old. His wife Sarah was barren. He had no children, no army, no land. and God told him he would become the father of nations. The seed of Genesis 3, the descendant who would crush evil, now had an address. It would come through Abraham's line. But God did not stop at a verbal promise. In Genesis chapter 15, he did something unprecedented. He told Abraham to cut animals in half, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon, and lay the pieces in 2 rows. In the ancient Near East, both parties of a covenant walked between the pieces, swearing, "May what happened to these animals happen to me if I break this oath." It was a blood oath, the most binding contract the ancient world knew. But here is the staggering detail. God put Abraham into a deep sleep. A smoking firepot and a flaming torch, representing God's presence, passed between the pieces alone. God walked the covenant by himself. He took the entire obligation and the entire curse for failure upon himself. Abraham contributed nothing but sleeping faith. This covenant was unconditional, unbreakable, and if it was ever broken, it would cost God, not Abraham. And those 5 animals, the heifer, the goat, the ram, the dove, and the pigeon, are the exact same 5 animals later prescribed in Leviticus chapter 1 for Israel's sacrificial system. At the moment of the covenant, God was previewing a system that would not be codified for another 600 years. The architecture was already in place. The plan was already complete. Then came the crisis that nearly ended everything. Genesis chapter 22. God commanded Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, his only son, the sole carrier of the covenant seed. If Isaac died on that altar, the bloodline died. The promise died. 4,000 years of history died on a mountain in Moriah. Abraham raised the knife. God stopped him. A ram was provided. And Mount Moriah, remember that name, is the same mountain where Solomon would build the temple 1,000 years later. The same ridge where tradition places Golgotha. The place where a father nearly sacrificed his only son would become the place where God did. The covenant passed through Isaac, not Ishmael. Then through Jacob, not Esau. God consistently chose the unlikely, the younger over the elder, the overlooked over the obvious. And when Jacob wrestled with God at the Jabbok River, God gave him a new name, Israel, meaning he who strives with God. The man who fought God became the father of the nation that would carry God's name for the rest of history. Jacob fathered 12 sons, and those 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. But the path from promise to nation was not a straight line. It ran through betrayal, slavery, and a dungeon in a foreign land. Joseph, Jacob's favored son, was sold by his own brothers into slavery in Egypt. He was falsely accused, imprisoned, and forgotten. And yet, God raised him to become the second most powerful man in the world. What appeared to be the end of the family was God's setup. Joseph saved his family from famine. The 70 members of Jacob's house settled in the land of Goshen, inside the borders of the most powerful empire on earth. 400 years later, those 70 had become 2 million enslaved people. The covenant family was trapped inside Egypt, and the promise needed a deliverer. The deliverer was Moses. Born under a death sentence, Pharaoh had ordered every Hebrew male infant drowned in the Nile. Hidden in a basket by his mother, pulled from the river by Pharaoh's own daughter, raised in the palace of the empire that was trying to destroy his people. Exiled to the desert for 40 years after killing an Egyptian, and then, at 80 years old, standing before a bush that burned but was not consumed, he heard the voice of God. "I have seen the affliction of my people. I am sending you to Pharaoh." 10 plagues dismantled the gods of Egypt one by one. The Nile turned to blood, a strike against Hapi, the god of the Nile. Darkness covered the land for 3 days, a strike against Ra, the sun god. Each plague was not random. Each was a targeted assault on a specific Egyptian deity. God was not simply freeing a nation. He was proving a point. The gods of Egypt were powerless before the God of Abraham. The final plague, the death of every firstborn in Egypt, was averted for Israel only by the blood of a lamb, painted on the doorposts. The lamb died so the firstborn could live. This was the Passover. And this image, the sacrificial lamb whose blood spares the condemned, would echo through the next 1,500 years of Israel's worship, until a man stood on the banks of the Jordan and was called the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. At Mount Sinai, the covenant transformed. It was no longer a family promise between God and Abraham. It became a national contract. God offered Israel a unique status. "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." The people agreed. "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." The law, 613 commands, was not a replacement of the Abrahamic covenant. It was the architecture built on top of the foundation. The promise was the bedrock. The law was the structure showing what a covenant people should look like. And then the crisis came, the fastest betrayal in biblical history. While Moses was on the mountain receiving the law, Israel built a golden calf. They broke the covenant before the ink was dry, within 40 days of agreeing to it. God's response was terrifying. He told Moses, "Leave me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And I will make of you a great nation." God offered to scrap the descendants of Abraham entirely and restart the covenant through Moses alone. And when he spoke of them in his anger, he called them your people, speaking to Moses, not my people. The disownment was deliberate. This is one of the most dangerous moments in the entire Old Testament. God was not bluffing. He was offering Moses a shortcut: abandon the descendants of Abraham and begin a new covenant nation from Moses' own bloodline. The promise could have continued. The seed could have been preserved. But every descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, the 12 tribes, the 400-year history of the covenant family, would have been erased. Moses would have replaced Abraham. The entire biblical narrative would have been rewritten. Moses refused. He interceded. He did not appeal to Israel's merit. They had none. He appealed to God's reputation and his sworn oath to Abraham. "What will the Egyptians say?" he argued. "That you brought them out to kill them in the mountains?" And then the decisive argument: "Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self." Moses anchored his plea not in Israel's worthiness, but in the unbreakable nature of the covenant God had walked alone in Genesis 15. God relented. The thread held. And then Moses descended the mountain, ground the golden calf to powder, mixed it with water, and forced the Israelites to drink it. They literally consumed their own sin. The Levites, the only tribe that rallied to Moses' side, were commanded to take up swords and execute 3,000 of the primary idolaters. On that day, the Levites earned their priestly status. Their loyalty was written in blood. 40 years of wandering followed. The faithless generation died in the desert. When 12 spies were sent into Canaan, 10 returned terrified, saying the inhabitants were giants. Only 2, Joshua and Caleb, trusted the promise. God's judgment was swift. The entire adult generation would die in the wilderness. Only Joshua and Caleb would enter the promised land. Moses himself was forbidden from entering. He struck the rock in anger instead of speaking to it, and God told him, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, You will not bring this community into the land I give them." Moses climbed Mount Nebo. He looked across the Jordan at the land he would never enter, the land of the promise. He passed the mantle to Joshua, and a new generation stood at the edge of the river. The land God had promised Abraham 4 centuries ago was finally within reach. Joshua led Israel across the Jordan on dry ground, an echo of the Red Sea crossing a generation earlier. The walls of Jericho fell. City by city, the land was taken. The promise made to Abraham, "To your offspring I will give this land," was fulfilled. The seed was in the land. And before he died, Joshua gathered all of Israel at Shechem, the exact location where God had first appeared to Abraham upon his arrival in Canaan, recorded in Genesis chapter 12. The covenant was being renewed at the very place it had begun. Joshua issued the challenge, "Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." But Israel did not hold. After Joshua's death, the nation spiraled into a cycle so relentless it reads like a recurring nightmare. They abandoned God. God allowed an enemy to oppress them. They cried out. God raised a judge, a deliverer, to rescue them. They had peace for a generation. And then they abandoned God again. Deborah, Gideon, Samson. Each judge was more flawed than the last. And buried in this era is a detail that belongs in the genealogy of the Messiah and yet is almost never taught. Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute who hid the Israelite spies in Jericho, did not merely survive the conquest. She married into Israel, became the mother of Boaz, who married Ruth, a Moabite widow. Their great-grandson was King David. A Canaanite prostitute and a Moabite widow are listed in Matthew chapter 1 as grandmothers of the Messiah. The bloodline of the promise was never ethnically pure. It was a bloodline of grace. The era of the judges reached its moral basement in the final chapters of the book. A crime so horrifying it mirrors Sodom and Gomorrah sparked a civil war that nearly exterminated the entire tribe of Benjamin. Only 600 men survived. The covenant people had become indistinguishable from the nations they were supposed to replace. The last line of Judges summarizes the era with devastating precision. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It was a cry for leadership. The people demanded a king. The prophet Samuel anointed Saul, and the monarchy began. Saul was tall, impressive, and deeply insecure. His reign began with promise and ended in disobedience, jealousy, and madness. God rejected him and sent Samuel to anoint a replacement. Not the tallest, not the strongest, not the eldest. A shepherd boy, the youngest son of Jesse, a boy named David. David killed a giant. He unified the 12 tribes. He captured Jerusalem and brought the Ark of the Covenant into the city. For the first time in history, the covenant had a capital. And then God made a promise to David that changed everything. 2 Samuel chapter 7. David wanted to build a house, a temple, for God. God responded with a wordplay that carries the weight of eternity. "You will not build me a house, I will build you a house." Not a building, a dynasty. God promised David an eternal throne. His descendant would reign forever. This was the Davidic covenant, the promise that bridges directly to the Messiah. 1,500 years later, an angel would appear to a young woman in Nazareth and say, "The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and of his kingdom there will be no end." Jesus is called Son of David, because this promise demanded a forever king from David's bloodline. But the man after God's own heart did not remain untouchable. David committed adultery with Bathsheba and orchestrated the murder of her husband, Uriah the Hittite. God's judgment was absolute. "The sword shall never depart from your house." David's family unraveled: rape, murder, civil war. His own son Absalom drove him from the throne. The king who was promised an eternal dynasty nearly lost his actual kingdom to his own child. The Davidic covenant survived, not because David deserved it, because God had sworn it. David's son Solomon built the temple, the dwelling place of God on earth. It took 7 years to construct, employed 180,000 workers, and was overlaid with gold so extensively that ancient sources describe it as blinding in the sunlight. When the Ark of the Covenant was carried into the Holy of Holies, the glory cloud of God filled the temple so completely that the priests could not stand to minister. Fire fell from heaven and consumed the sacrifices on the altar. God's presence had a permanent address, and during the dedication, Solomon prayed a prayer that reveals the temple's true purpose. 1 Kings chapter 8. He specifically prayed for foreigners, non-Israelites drawn by God's fame. When a foreigner comes from a far country because of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm, when he comes and prays toward this temple, hear from heaven your dwelling place, and do according to all that the foreigner calls to you. The temple was never intended to be an exclusion zone. It was designed as a beacon for the nations. This detail is staggering. At the peak of Israel's national glory, the king specifically opened the door to outsiders. The God of Abraham was never meant to remain a tribal deity. The covenant was always heading toward the world. But Solomon's wisdom did not last. 700 wives and 300 concubines turned his heart to foreign gods. He built high places for Chemosh, the god of Moab, and for Moloch, the god of the Ammonites, on the very hills surrounding Jerusalem. The man who built God's house built houses for pagan gods within sight of the temple. After his death, his son Rehoboam refused to lighten the people's tax burden. The kingdom ripped in two. 10 tribes north, called Israel, 2 tribes south, called Judah. And the first thing the northern king, Jeroboam, did was set up golden calves at Bethel and Dan. The same idol, the same rebellion, 1,000 years after Sinai. The golden age was over. The fracture had begun. ERA 6, the fracture. The northern kingdom produced 19 kings across 2 centuries. Not a single one was called righteous. Ahab and Jezebel introduced Baal worship on an industrial scale. Elijah stood alone against 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and fire fell from heaven. But even that miracle could not reverse the trajectory. The north was falling, and it was falling fast. The south fared slightly better. A handful of righteous kings, Hezekiah, who survived Sennacherib's siege when an angel destroyed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night. Josiah, who rediscovered the book of the law in the temple and tore his robes when he heard what it said, because the nation had wandered so far that they had literally lost the scriptures. But even the best kings of Judah could only slow the decline. They could not stop it. And then came the crisis that brought the covenant closer to extinction than at any point in 4,000 years. Queen Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, married into the royal house of Judah. When her son died, she seized power and ordered the execution of every remaining descendant of David, every royal heir, every child. She nearly succeeded. Only one baby survived, Joash, smuggled out by his aunt Jehosheba and hidden inside the temple for 6 years. For 6 years, the entire Davidic covenant, the eternal throne, the messianic bloodline, the promise that would one day produce the Messiah, hung on the life of one hidden infant in a storage room of the temple. In the 7th year, the priest Jehoiada staged a coup, revealed Joash, crowned him king, and executed Athaliah. The thread held, barely. In the midst of this collapse, God raised prophets. Isaiah saw the coming king, a suffering servant who would bear the sins of many. Hosea married a prostitute on God's command to demonstrate the scandalous love of God for an unfaithful people. Jeremiah wept over Jerusalem's coming destruction, while his own countrymen threw him into a cistern for speaking the truth. And it was Jeremiah, standing in the shadow of national annihilation, who delivered the most forward-looking covenant promise in the entire Old Testament. Jeremiah chapter 31. I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, not like the covenant I made with their fathers. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. The old covenant was on stone. It was broken repeatedly. The new one would be internal, spiritual, unbreakable. 1,000 years later, Jesus would hold a cup at the Last Supper and say, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood." One detail most people do not know: when Assyria conquered the northern kingdom in 722 BC and scattered the population, creating the so-called 10 lost tribes, those tribes were not entirely lost. Before the fall, faithful northerners had been migrating south to Judah for generations to maintain proper worship in Jerusalem. The southern kingdom preserved remnants of all 12 tribes, not just Judah and Benjamin. The thread was thinner than anyone knew, but it was unbroken. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem and Solomon's temple. The land was empty. The temple was rubble. The throne was vacant. The people were dragged to Babylon in chains. But the covenant survived, in exile, in memory, in the words of the prophets. Era 7, the exile and the silence. The covenant people sat by the rivers of Babylon and wept. Psalm 137. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Everything appeared lost. The land, gone. The temple, rubble. The throne, empty. The covenant looked dead, but it was not dead. It was in exile. Daniel survived a den of lions. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego survived a furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal. Ezekiel stood in a valley of dry bones and heard God say, "These bones will live." The message was unmistakable. The covenant was not over. It was waiting. And here is a detail confirmed not by the Bible but by archaeology. Cuneiform tablets discovered in Babylon list food rations issued to prisoners, and among them is Yahushua, king of the land of Yahudu. Jehoiachin, king of Judah, along with his 5 sons, listed as royal princes, receiving rations 20 times larger than ordinary captives. Even in a foreign prison, the Davidic royal house was recognized. God preserved the bloodline in chains. After 70 years, exactly as Jeremiah had prophesied, the Persian king Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to return and rebuild. Zerubbabel, a descendant of David, led the first wave back to Jerusalem. The Davidic line was alive. The covenant city was reclaimed. But the return was not a restoration. It was a shadow of one. When the foundation of the Second Temple was laid, the old men who remembered Solomon's temple wept, not with joy, with grief. The new structure was so inferior it broke their hearts. But the real terror was not the architecture. It was what was missing inside. The Ark of the Covenant was gone, lost forever. The Holy of Holies, the most sacred room on earth, the room where God's presence had dwelt between the wings of the cherubim, was an empty room, literally empty. The people had returned from exile, but God's presence had not. The temple stood. The rituals resumed. The priests served. But the room at the center of it all was hollow. The people were back. The temple was rebuilt. But God was not in it. Not yet. Not until a man named Emmanuel, God with us, walked through its gates. Malachi, the last prophet, closed the Old Testament with a warning and a promise. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Then silence. For 400 years no prophet spoke, no vision was given, no voice from heaven broke through. 400 years, the longest silence in the biblical record. But in the silence, God was not absent. He was orchestrating. Persia fell. Greece rose. Alexander the Great conquered the known world, and Greek became the common language of the Mediterranean. The Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, a version called the Septuagint, making the scriptures accessible to every nation for the first time in history. Antiochus IV desecrated the temple in 167 BC, sacrificing a pig on the altar and banning circumcision and Torah reading. The Maccabees revolted, reclaimed the temple, and rededicated it, the origin of Hanukkah. Then Rome conquered. Roman roads connected the known world. Roman law created order. The Pax Romana made travel safe for the first time in centuries. Synagogues spread across the empire. Jewish houses of worship in every major city. Ready-made gathering places for a message that had not yet arrived. And through all of it, through the Persian period, the Greek conquest, the Maccabean Wars, the Roman occupation, the hunger for the promised king grew. 400 years of foreign rule. 400 years of reading the prophets and waiting. 400 years of looking at an empty Holy of Holies and wondering, will God ever come back? The Old Testament ends mid-sentence. 39 books, 4,000 years, one thread, a seed promised in a garden, narrowed to a family, forged into a nation, given a land, granted a throne, fractured by disobedience, nearly extinguished by a queen, exiled to Babylon, returned to a diminished land, and then silence. The entire Old Testament is a setup. The promise is still unfulfilled. The throne of David is still empty. The Holy of Holies is still hollow. The seed of Genesis 3 has not yet arrived. And then, after 400 years of nothing, an angel appeared to a priest named Zechariah, standing in that very temple, and said, "Your wife Elizabeth will bear a son, and you shall call his name John." Elijah had come. The silence was broken. And in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son. If you want to learn more about the Bible and uncover the deeper truths hidden in Scripture, subscribe to the channel and consider becoming a channel member. Your support allows us to keep bringing these stories to light. And if you want to know what happened during those 400 years of silence,
Okay, that's
the
good.
empires,
I would recommend that if you like things, can we have these lights on? If you like something like that, or even that film, I would watch it again just to get an idea of what you just saw. Okay, questions? Surely you have questions or comments?
This is not a question, but I didn't realize that they said that Rahab was Boaz's mom. Is that what it said? I never heard
Yeah,
the two together. That's pretty wild.
yeah.
And when they talk about when God sent all the plagues, that each plague destroyed a different kind of
One of their gods. Yeah. Yeah, they're all a judgment on different gods of Egypt. Yeah. I'd have to go back and look at them to tell you exactly which ones are which. But there's all 10 of them are judgments on. You know, I thought it was interesting. One of the things that they said right at the beginning is that the gospel was first preached in the Garden of Eden when he said the serpent, the one that's coming is going to crush the serpent's head. Well, that's Jesus. That's a prophecy of what's coming through him and with him. Honestly, I had never heard that before. I think, the rainbow is a war bow that God is aiming toward heaven and disarming himself. And basically he's saying, I am disarming myself. I'm never going to do this again. And so while we look at it, well, he's not going to send the flood again. It was, like it said, a disarming bow. I've never heard that before, aimed at himself. I hope what you caught is that the covenant began to be narrowed and narrowed and narrowed as they went along. That it first started, of course, obviously with Adam and Eve, but then when he makes his covenant with Abraham, he narrows it to a person, and then within that person, it's narrowed to Isaac, and then to Jacob, and then right on down the line till, of course, we have Judah and the coming Messiah. And so, I mean, if you can begin to understand that, it begins to make sense that the Old Testament is a story. It's not just this voluminous amount of information. There's really a story from the beginning. You can even see it with you've got Cain and Abel. There was the righteous seed and the unrighteous seed. But then after Cain kills Abel, there's Seth, and he is a righteous seed of God. But it just keeps moving in this direction that God is going somewhere. And again, the Old Testament is a story, and it's not as wide as what you think if you understand what it's moving to, that God is moving toward the Messiah. And, when you read the prophets, you read Isaiah or Jeremiah, and I even do it because I listen to the Bible every morning, and I'll be listening to Jeremiah and just go, why? It just goes on and on and on. But you have to realize these guys are prophesying over decades. It isn't like, that they woke up one day and said, okay, I'm going to do, 4 chapters in telling Israel that this is them standing up at different times, different seasons, basically the same message, warning them. When you're talking about, like Jeremiah, his warning is it's going to happen and you're not going to be able to stop it now. We're in a cycle of God's retribution because of your disobedience. But it's only going to be for 70 years, and then you're going to come back. You're going to be thrown out of the land, but you're going to come back. And Isaiah, the same, not the same message, but his is also prophetic of what's coming, but it doesn't happen for years. But within it is interspersed, messianic words. He mentioned Hosea, that Hosea, in marrying the prostitute, was God speaking to them, really in a story that this is me and you. I am so compassionate, and I know what you are, but I'm still willing to embrace you with you and your condition. Somebody else, just a question or a comment? Okay, speak up. I'm sorry.
She didn't know that there was 400 years of silence.
Yeah, between Malachi and I really appreciate what they did in this video in talking about, the conquering of Greece during that time, and then, Greece, even though Rome conquered Greece militarily, Greece conquered Rome culturally. The culture of Greece went throughout the world. In the Septuagint, many of you probably heard of that, but it is the Old Testament translated into Greek. So suddenly the Old Testament was really available to the world to be able to read they didn't have printing presses, but you know what I mean. It was suddenly, other people could read it. And then when it talks about Rome, and and he said it that way. It's a setup by God that Rome, when they conquered the known world, they created the Pax Romana and built roads throughout the world so that when Jesus came and the gospel was being spread, there really was a method in order to spread the gospel quickly, because there were roads all over the Roman Empire. And then you heard him mention that when they came back into their land and Rome conquered, that the Israelites put temples all over the known Roman Empire. So when the gospel comes, and you'll probably read when you are reading the book of Acts or something, that they went to the synagogue in so-and-so place. Well, that's because they were already there. They were built before the gospel. And I've been in Rome, and I was... The amazing thing about it is that there are bridges that you can cross in Rome that are 3,000 years old. You're just going, who are these people? They planned on being here for a while. Okay, another question or comment?
I like to emphasize that the 400 years of silence doesn't mean God stops speaking.
Yeah,
It just means there's no scripture written there.
yeah. And the Maccabees happened during that time. I don't know, you may or may not have heard of that. If you have a Catholic Bible, it will have the book of Maccabees in it. And it's not been considered inspired by the Protestant church, but it is a history of the children of Israel rebelling against the Maccabean reign and defeating them. And that's where they get Hanukkah. That's their celebration. I always have found this interesting, that when God cut the covenant with Abraham, and they, back in the time of Abraham, when they cut a covenant with a person, they would slaughter animals and put the animals in 2 rows, and then they would walk through it. And the idea was, if you break the covenant that I'm setting with you, if you break it, may you be like one of these dead animals. But when God cut the covenant with Abraham, he put Abraham to sleep, and he himself walked through it alone. So basically he was saying, the covenant is on me.
So they cut the animals in half for sacrifice, or like a symbol of sacrification.
This animals is a symbol of sacrificing.
When they cut them in half and put them on
Mhm.
one side here, one side here, and they walk through, that was a symbol of saying obedience or sacrifice.
Well, it was, if I'm establishing a covenant with you and did this, when we walk through this and you become a covenant sister with me, if you break the covenant, whatever we have settled our covenant is, if you break it, may you be like one of these dead animals. It's a big deal that it's a life or death situation. If I were to break covenant with you, then it means take my life. So in this case, when God walks through it alone, he's saying the whole covenant is on me. I'm the only one that can break this covenant, and it will be death to me if it's broken. And so you can understand, even though throughout history, these hundreds of years, the covenant held because God was working it. Even with the rebellion of Israel and all the things they did and didn't do, that God was saying, I'm going to do this in spite of you. And he would work a way to make it happen. Does that make sense? Yeah. Somebody else?
So it was Joshua that led them through the sea and not Moses?
No, that was through the Jordan River.
Or through the Jordan
Yeah. Yeah, I can see how that could mix up. What they said there was when Joshua led them through, it was reminiscent of when Moses led them through the Red Sea. They didn't really show that in the film, but we only got 35 minutes.
That's where it kind of got confused.
Yeah, but when they come up to the edge of the Promised Land, when they went in, they had to go through the Jordan River, and it parted, and they walked on dry land. And really, it's probably a sign that God is saying also, as I was with Moses, I'm going to be with Joshua. That would help, wouldn't it? If you're following Moses, I'm going to be the pastor after Moses, really? But then to have the river open for you, I guess this guy has got something going on here. Okay, who else? Do you get that, when you look in the Bible and you have, Moses and Abraham and the covenant being set, and before there was ever a David, there were judges. You've read about Samson. Actually, Samuel was a judge. Who's the lady I'm trying to think of? Deborah. There's these different judges. So there was no king, so the way the people were ruled or directed were through these judges. And when Samuel comes along, he's the most prolific probably of all the judges, righteous man. He's the one who anointed David to be king, and Saul. But they also recognize that though Samuel was a great man, his sons weren't. And then, so they were really concerned. We just want a king. We want a king like everybody else. It grieved God's heart. If you read it in the scriptures, it really grieved his heart because he wanted to be the ruler, and Samuel even told him that. But God relented, and so after the judges that you read about in the book of Judges, then you're going to see, like in 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, that's basically the history of the different kings that you find in Israel. Do you remember where he talks about when the kingdom split? I've only got two heads shaking. But what happened there, and again, if you want the coordinates for this, I would go back and watch it again and listen to it again, because it will help you to put this thing together. But when the kingdom split, you have David, and then their golden years of Solomon the wealth was just, but then I don't know how you do this, but what was it, 1,000 wives and 300 concubines? That man is in trouble. So anyway, and so he's really not doing well. And so when he dies, you have the kingdom going to his son, Rehoboam. But Rehoboam is not such a great guy either. The people have been heavily taxed. And when the kingdom split, Rehoboam, rather than reducing their taxes, decided, I'm just going to make it worse. So the kingdom splits there, and you've got 10 tribes to the north, and then only 2 tribes that end up, and we usually call that Judah, but Benjamin and Judah are in the south. And that's that split that happened right after Solomon, his son, is the one that helped that to happen. And then if you follow it, and this isn't real plainly put here, but the northern kingdom never has a good king, ever. If you read it, they're all evil until finally God says, you know what, I'm done. And they go into captivity, and they really don't ever really totally recover, even though, according to this, and I think it's true, you had some migrating from the north into the south, into Judah over the decades. So we don't have 10 lost tribes. We have a mixture in Judah, but Judah lasts longer than the northern tribe, and they have several good kings, but they still, go into idol worship, and God says, So have you ever heard about the Babylonian captivity? Have you heard that? That's when they go into captivity for 70 years. Jeremiah prophesies that. They go into the captivity, and that's where you have Daniel. Daniel is in in Babylon, along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's during that period. There's 70 years there that they're there, and then they come out, and you read, subsequent to that you have Nehemiah and Obadiah. Did I say Ezra? Yeah, Ezra, Obadiah, and Nehemiah. They're the ones that are going to come back or go back into Israel. Cyrus, the king of Babylon, lets them go back and rebuild. And so those prophets are really the prophets of the temple that you'll read later on in the latter part of the Old Testament. And then, as like Pastor Josh was saying a moment ago, there's, with Malachi, the last writing prophet that we know of at the end of the Old Testament. So what I'm hoping to do, and I know that even what I'm saying, you may be rolling your eyes going, okay, but if you like to listen to that several times, there's another one in that section that's an hour long, which may be a little more detailed, which may help. Just have a few more minutes here. Questions, comments? I do too. Some of the things kind of bother me when they're talking about someone and they come back to Noah with the rainbow. Now, what's that got to do with this right now? But anyway, you just kind of put up with it. But they give you the information that I think we need. Anybody else? I can give it to you. You want to write it down? Okay, it's called The Entire History of the Old Testament in 35 minutes in 4K. Okay, the entire history of the Old Testament in 35 minutes in 4K. And then that's under Bible Origins. Bible Origins, the entire history of the Old Testament in 35 minutes in 4K. Okay, well, thank you for your time. God bless you, Lord. Just imprint your word on our hearts and help us to get it. And we just love you and we bless you and we thank you in Jesus' name for this time together. Amen. God bless you.